6 candidates are in the running for 3 seats on the Cupertino City Council. As part of the City Channel's ongoing coverage of this race toward Election Tuesday, you're about to see an up-close and personal introduction to one of those 6 candidates. This is Candidate Roundtable with tonight's featured City Council candidate, Raj Abhyanker.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Candidate Roundtable. I'm the moderator, Roberta Holloman, a member of the League of Women Voters of Cupertino-Sunnyvale. Joining me are candidate Raj Abhyanker and media panelists Mei Hui Wang, South Bay Bureau Chief of the World Journal, a Chinese language daily, and Ann Ernst, staff reporter of the Cupertino Courier. Mr. Abhyanker is an attorney and has earned a bachelor's, an MBA, and JD degrees from Arizona State University. He was born in San Francisco. He is a member of the State Bar Association, Lawyers in the Library, a pro bono organization, and has been a public television volunteer. Mr. Abhyanker, would you tell us why you're running for City Council?
Sure. I'm running because there's a voice in our community that isn't heard. I'm running because there's a voice of the people who aren't influenced by the current city government, who are working very hard just to live in Cupertino, that have moved perhaps in the last 10 or 15 years, and are the next generation of the future of our city. And they have concerns that are unique. And broadly, that's the main reason that I'm running. And to expand on what those concerns are, is most of the reason the people move to Cupertino today is the quality of schools. Second is the quality of life in our city, the open spaces, the cultural activities, the tightness of family bonds that are clearly there with the communities of Cupertino. So I believe that the voice of the generation of Cupertino residents who have moved in the last 10 or 15 years is quite different than the one that's been here 30 years or 25 years, particularly because the struggles are different. And I am one of those people that have moved here in that time frame. Particularly, it's more expensive for us to move into Cupertino, more expensive for us to afford a home, and we must work very hard just so we can make our mortgage. So I think that voice gets lost, and that's the reason I'm running.
Thank you.
Well, you sure answered all the questions we had in mind. Well, my question is that you were born in San Francisco and
That's right.
got educated in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
But of all the cities, big and small, you choose Cupertino to live.
Mm-hmm.
Must be a reason. When was that happening and why?
Yeah, so I was born in San Francisco. My parents sent me to India to live for my first years. So my first 5 years of life, they sent me to live with aunts and uncles. So I lived in India, in Nagpur, India. And I moved back to the U.S. And when I moved back, my parents were living in Phoenix. So that's why I grew up primarily in Phoenix. I've gone to grade school, high school, college, university in Phoenix, Arizona. That being said, I've always had a tie to Cupertino because when my parents in 1980 decided to leave their full-time jobs, they decided to start a dealership. And that dealership was an Apple dealership. And Apple was headquartered in Cupertino. So Cupertino was a second home for our family ever since 1980. My father's business, I worked there full-time through grade school and high school, after school in the summers and whenever I could. And I came to Cupertino often. So I learned a lot about the city and I found it to be a great place to live. The weather's nice, there's an energy here, there's high-tech companies, and it seemed like a great place to one day make a home. So I moved to Cupertino for the first time 6 years ago. I moved as a tenant. I stayed at the Hamptons Apartments off of Prune Ridge and Wolf. We were fortunate enough to be able to buy a home a few years ago, and we're currently homeowners in Cupertino.
Thank you.
How do you see Cupertino growing in the future?
I see this in which way? Economically, socially, or which sense do you mean growth?
All the senses.
All the sense. Socially, I believe in the future there'll be a tighter bond among cultures. There'll be a blending of cultures. Today, I think there is a phenomenon where there's a lot of first-generation immigrants who are very happy in the city of Cupertino, but a bit reticent to go out and integrate with other types of communities. I believe in the future this will become less of a problem. The best of every culture will be brought to Cupertino, and that is the biggest difference I see in Cupertino in the future. The other thing I see economically, the city continuing to thrive. We have a talented group of people. We have some of the best education systems in the entire country. And I believe there's nothing that would stop an employer from leaving Cupertino, particularly because of the quality of minds that we have in our city.
And I read that you hope you can champion the silent views shared by many Cupertino residents and families.
Right.
If they're silent, how do you hear that? How can you be sure that you can champion that nobody else heard because it's silent?
Right, because I'm an attorney and I volunteer extensively in this community. I volunteer as a pro bono attorney for all kinds of issues. And I hear things that others don't. A lot of these things I hear in confidence because I have a lot of friends in the neighborhood. The friends refer other friends that face various legal challenges, legal problems, issues that are of concern to them as well as their neighbors. And because I'm known in my community, immediately around my home, particularly with my neighbors, I have the insight into the community that's a bit unique. I also volunteer in the Lawyers in the Library program throughout Santa Clara County. So I've worked on all kinds of legal issues, from landlord-tenant to criminal issues to tort issues. And these types of influences in my life give me a perspective that's unique. Furthermore, as a professional, I'm a patent attorney. As a patent attorney, I work with lots of technology companies. I've written patents for Apple Computer. I've worked at Hewlett-Packard. I am intimately connected to the high-tech community here. So beyond the social circle, the economic circle I have a tie to. So I believe that that silent view, which is largely dictated by work, because today in Cupertino, people must work very hard just to live here. They don't have equity in their homes. They don't have 400,000. They moved a couple of years ago. Maybe they have a few hundred. The bottom line is it's difficult to live in Cupertino. So the issues are silent only because they don't have the time. To the extent they do have the time, they turn to the people they trust the most, which is their neighbors and friends. And that's where I bring that insight.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier the Cupertino schools. What will you do as a city council member to help maintain the superiority they now enjoy?
Right, so primarily I'm going to work with the Cupertino Union School District and the Fremont Union School District. I believe that a city councilman should be very much aligned to those two, plus the De Anza College Board. I believe that we need to support them in whichever way we can. How can we support them? Well, there's one way. If ever they need any support from the government of Cupertino for space, or they need allocation for budgets, if there are any discretionary budgets, I believe we should make it a point to address the needs of the teachers and students who attend the schools in Cupertino to the extent possible. I realize the city council person isn't on the school board, but at the same time, we have to have a similar plan for making sure that the interests of the schools, the interests of the teachers, the interests of the parents is heard at all levels in our city. Because one of our strongest assets is our quality of our schools. Second is the economic base we have. And third, I believe, is the strength of our cultures.
So it must be hard for you to choose between to be in school board or to be in city council, right? Because they have some vacancy too. Why do you choose to run for city council instead of school board member?
I believe there are many issues in Cupertino that need to be addressed, aside from the school issue. Particularly, there's a phenomenon which is tending to change the nature of our city from one which is largely suburban to one that's more dense and urban. There are two sides of this issue. I've heard both sides, and I believe that our city should retain its suburban character. I believe that our city should limit the type of exceptions to the general plan that have pervaded our city in the last couple of years, particularly many high-rise condos, many exceptions that are allowing buildings to be built closer and closer to roads. It's great we have a general plan and we're hoping to adopt a new one, but what we must do is we must make sure that that general plan is adhered to and exceptions are minimized to it. To the extent exceptions do get proposed, it should not be an easy road for a person wishing to get those exceptions. Particularly, we need to make sure the plan we have in place works. And that's one of the reasons I'm running. And clearly, there's ballot measures this time. I support those ballot measures. I'm the only city council candidate, and unlike the current city council, I'm the only one who supports those ballot measures. And I strongly believe that these ballot measures will work for our city because they will achieve the kind of city that we want to be and remain. We don't want, the majority of residents, majority of my neighbors, don't want lots of traffic in our streets. They certainly don't want overcrowding of our schools. Legally, I understand certain arguments may not work for overcrowding of schools and limiting growth in terms of buildings and high-rise, high-density housing. However, the reality is we have an opportunity to permanently establish Cupertino as a city that's more like Saratoga and Los Altos and less like San Francisco. Without these initiatives, we are clearly going into a direction of urbanization which isn't what I and others have moved to this city for.
How do you plan on balancing the suburban nature that you're speaking of with bringing in more retail?
Retail is very important, clearly, because retail is where our revenue base comes from, as you know. Property taxes isn't. 4% if all the property taxes goes to the city. I don't know why the structure is the way it is. We need to examine it legally, see if there's any ways we can influence a change. Now I realize the legislative history that limits that change. As far as retail, we do need to encourage retail in the city. We have a base of residents who is wealthy enough to afford retail, who's active enough to want to go to retail, and we have the population base to support more retail than we have. Residents today go elsewhere. Retail can be accommodated within the framework of the general plan without exceptions. You can still have a great restaurant, a high quality restaurant, and still have the setback, height, and density limitations adhered to that are outlined in the general plan without requiring an exception. Therefore, retail should be encouraged. We can't force retail. It's a private business. If they want to move here, it's great. We should create incentives for them to move here. We should create incentives that are outside the structure that they're going to occupy and more aligned to their cash flow and their business requirements in terms of support from the city, incentives to move to the city, and rent benefits, if such can be provided through a city council.
Okay, let me take a minute to tell our viewers about some other resources that they can go to get more information on candidates and the issues. For local city council candidates and the ballot measures that are going to be on the November ballot, you can go to the city's website at cupertino.org. And for statewide ballot measures and also local candidates and local measures, the League of Women Voters website, smartvoter.org, has a lot of information for you. So let's go on.
Well, based on what I heard from you just now, I reckon that the answer is no to the question if we want a big box store to be in this town, like a big store, like a Home Depot or Costco. So, because you just said that we want to keep that suburban ambience to the city.
I do. Now, the store should be separated from its location. If I say that we don't want those stores, that would be wrong. I want to have a good place to shop. I want to have places to go to buy home hardware. We already have a Home Depot, so whether a Costco we need or not. Now the Home Depot happens to be in the other side. It's not even in Cupertino, from what I understand. It's in San Jose. But we have one pretty close to most Cupertino residents. So that problem is taken care of. The question is, can we build a structure? Can a business build a structure, or can developers build a structure that conforms to the general plan and still is attractive to tenants that wish to locate here? I believe the answer is yes, without making an exception to the current general plan.
I understand that you are interested in creating the city's own police department. Can you explain why and how you would offset the increase in cost?
Certainly. This is an issue which is important to me. It's important to many residents. Many minority groups, if you look at the Chinese community and Indian community, have faced, over the past 8 years actually, strings of burglaries in homes. These burglaries in homes have specifically targeted the minority groups in our city. Why? Because they are the most vulnerable. In many ways, they have ways of storing their jewelry which is quite unique. It might not make sense to you, but the question is, for me as an Indian American, a second generation Indian American, I'm sympathetic to that. And what's happened is we have this string of burglaries that's not getting addressed properly. I don't believe the current police department that's supporting us, which is the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department, is the best way to go. Virtually every other city, not every other city, but most other cities in Santa Clara County have chosen their own police department. Why have they chosen it? Not because it's cheaper, but because they're more safe. I don't want to put safety of our residents as a second priority to anyone. Particularly the investigative team of the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department. I have my doubts about its capability. Others, attorneys that are peers of mine, have expressed similar views, and I'll leave it at that.
So now comes the question of money. Yeah, we all want that. We want to feel safe. We want to have good school. We want to have a quiet neighborhood. But we want enough money to provide enough services.
Sure. And the biggest way we got first we got an issue with property tax in the city. Many other Santa Clara County cities get 8-10% of the property tax money coming to the city. All our problems would be solved if we were able to find a way to get a larger percent of the property tax money to go to the city. I need to understand why it is we're limited in the constraints we have. Now I realize in the 70s there's some legislation that limits the change that we can do, but I don't believe it's outside the judicial system to challenge those laws. And we need to actively challenge those laws because it's quite unfair. And that unfair distribution of property tax revenue has precisely put us in the juncture we are today. We have a budget shortfall of $2 million, right? Something like 58 million versus 56 million, something like that. It's a $2 million gap of our annual budget versus what we spend. There has to be a way to increase the portion of the property tax rate. That's one way. Second is to create incentives for businesses to move to the city, okay? Not necessarily large Apple computers, but we need to create an incubator for startups. Silicon Valley is built upon startups. We in Cupertino are fortunate to have some great startups that have become very successful and are today major employers. We have to be the first choice for those startups to locate. Not Palo Alto, not anywhere else. We have empty tech parks. We need to figure out a way to utilize that so we can encourage every aspiring entrepreneur with an idea to locate in Cupertino rather than somewhere else, because that will create a revenue base for us long term.
If you are elected, you will become the first East Indian representative of the city. How will you effectively represent other cultures and other ethnicities?
Yeah, so let me first make sure I'm not the first East Indian, okay, because I'm American. I was born in America. I was raised in America. I'm clearly American, just as you or I, okay, are the same. The bottom line is I have a perspective. I have a perspective because I'm a child of immigrants. And I have a perspective that understands what it's like for parents who come to this country or who want to send their kids to the best schools, may not be able to afford it, struggle every day so that their kids like me can go to those schools and live in the places where those schools are excellent. That unique perspective can only be had in a person like me, who's an American, but whose parents are of East Indian descent or any other Chinese descent, whichever descent, European descent, Russian descent. It's all the same to me. I'm an American. I represent the views of America. The Cupertino residents, I'm a bridge. I see the views. Most of my friends, I have friends of every culture. I have friends that are white, black, Hispanic, green, brown, whatever, Chinese. I have friends of every type of culture and race. And I believe that I can represent the bridge between the immigrants that have moved here today and those who have been here for a long time.
With the price of a single house in Cupertino go easily way over $1 million, do you still believe that we can offer affordable housing for our school teachers, firefighters, and police officers?
We have affordable housing. In fact, I was at the Planning Commission meeting yesterday. What was I there for? I have a large number of supporters who are at the AVR, who is at the Portofino. We have there's a Corsica and Portofino housing communities next to the AVR apartments. What are they proposing to do with those apartments? They're proposing to change them to condos. Change them effectively from affordable housing to unaffordable housing. Clearly, a condo in Cupertino, a one-bedroom, one-bath condo, would sell for no less than $400,000 to $500,000. I also have my real estate broker license. I don't practice real estate, I'm an attorney, but at the same time, I understand real estate quite well. The bottom line is, a new person wishing to buy that condo is going to pay much more in terms of their mortgage. Suppose they're even able to come up with 10% down, $40,000 down. They still are going to be paying maybe $3,000 or $4,000 a month to live in that condo. You can rent a house, $1 million, my house like mine, which isn't a great house, but it's a nice house. It's much better than living in that one-bedroom condo, I'll tell you that. And that house, like mine, can rent for $2,000. There's a disparity. We have a situation in our city where builders and developers are trying to convince us that we don't have affordable housing. I believe the whole thing's a hoax. We have affordable housing. They're trying to change affordable housing to condos. And then later, 2 years from now, this is a cycle that's happened in Cupertino. I've been tracking it. 4 or 5 years ago, they said we didn't have enough apartments. The cycle will repeat. Developers will get richer. Cupertino residents will suffer.
The council, for the first time, is considering charging developers 1% of the cost of development to be used for public art. What are your thoughts on that?
I love art. Public art's great. And if we can create revenue for public art, that's fantastic. I don't know about the specifics of this particular developers getting 1% or not. But as far as public art goes, I love public art. I think public art should reflect the beauty of the cultures of Cupertino. I'd love to see public art that has influence from some of the history of Cupertino, from back when there were orchards here and cherry trees all over the city, to the immigrants that have come here in the last 20 years, to the Chinese community, to the Taiwanese community, the mainland Chinese, the Indian community. I'd like to see public art reflect the diversity and beauty of what makes Cupertino what it is today. Russian culture. There has to be a way to integrate and harness the power that we have collectively to display this public art that is going to transform the city into one that's separated by race and culture to one that's integrated. And we have an opportunity to do that uniquely through public art. So public art, I love it. I don't know about the specifics of whether 1% makes sense or not.
Well, you seem like a person with your eyes open what's happening in the neighborhood. And this is a very diversified neighborhood. Do you have the sense that everybody's getting along well? I mean, between different ethnic groups, and do you have any idea to enhance that good blending of all kinds of cultural and ethnicity?
One way you can do it is through art. Okay, art brings people together. Art reflects the common values of humanity. Art reflects what it is to be a person who lives in Cupertino and expresses their thoughts through their upbringing and culture, it can allow others to see the beauty of that culture. That's one way. But the bottom line is, do I believe people get along on Cupertino? No, I believe there's a divide. I believe there is a clear divide from people that have lived here 25, 30 years and people who have recently moved. Why? People that have lived here 20, 30 years ago may have paid off their house, may have children who may have gone to the schools, who may not be as educated, maybe or may not be, I don't know, but largely the people moving in are highly, highly educated. And so there is a divide. There's an economic divide because the people living here 30 years ago clearly are more wealthy in terms of equity. But at the same time, there's a cultural and educational divide. Furthermore, that culture and educational divide, as well as the divide between economic classes, manifests itself in various ways. One way it manifests itself is people gather with people of their own type. People go to the people's houses and associate with people who are like them.
I'm going to interrupt and say it's time to wrap up, so if you want to finish up your thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. So basically that's it.
You're going to bridge that divide.
I don't know if I'm going to bridge it or not, but I'm going to do, I'm going to at least have a view that is a person who's an American, who lives in Cupertino and can reflect the views and appreciate the views of immigrants as well as those who have been here a long time.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your being here.
Thank
Raj
you.
Abhyanker, Mei Wei Wong, and Ann Ernst. And thank you for watching. Be sure to join us again for the next edition of Candidate Roundtable. Check the city website for broadcast times.